Hello, I'm Allison, and welcome to another episode of Listen Now, Read Later, the podcast that leads you to your next favorite novel by reading you short stories. As always, we will be tying together short fiction and long-form fiction so that after you listen now, you can read later. Episode 4, Speak Now, Hemingway's version. Today we're bringing you 3 short stories from Ernest Hemingway, a master of using as few words as needed to get his point across. Afterward, Teresa will tell you why we have the perfect novel for you to read if today's stories were your cup of tea. Ernest Hemingway was an American author and journalist who won the 1954 Nobel Prize in Literature. His minimalist style of writing strongly influenced 20th century fiction. He was an ambulance driver in World War I and received a Bronze Star for bravery in World War II. He lived much of his life outside the U.S., spending time in France, Cuba, and Spain. Today you can visit his home in Key West, which is also home to approximately 60 six-toed cats. In our stories today, you'll see how his adventurous lifestyle affected what he wrote about. Our first 2 stories today, titled The 3-Day Blow and A Very Short Story, were originally published in Our Time, Hemingway's first short story collection. Our third story, Hills Like White Elephants, was originally published in 1927 in the literary magazine Transition, and then anthologized later that year in the short story collection Men Without Women. We're reading 3-Day Blow and A Very Short Story from a copy of the 1925 edition of In Our Time. We're reading Hills Like White Elephants from a PDF on the Weber State University website. All 3 of these stories are in the public domain. We hope you enjoy. The 3-Day Blow by Ernest Hemingway.
The rain stopped as Nick turned into the road that went up through the orchard. The fruit had been picked and the fall wind blew through the bare trees. Nick stopped and picked up a Wagner apple from beside the road, shiny in the brown grass from the rain. He put the apple in the pocket of his Mackinac coat. The road came out of the orchard onto the top of the hill. There was a cottage, the porch bare, smoke coming from the chimney. In back was the garage, the chicken coop and the second-growth timber like a hedge against the woods behind. The big trees swayed far over in the wind as he watched. It was the first of the autumn storms. As Nick crossed the open field above the orchard, the door of the cottage opened and Bill came out. He stood on the porch looking out.
"Well, Lemage," he said.
"Hey, Bill," Nick said, coming up the steps. They stood together, looking out across the country, down over the orchard, beyond the road, across the lower fields and the woods of the point to the lake. The wind was blowing straight down the lake. They could see the surf along 10 Mile Point. "She's blowing," Nick said.
"She'll blow like that for 3 days,"
Bill said. "Is your dad in?" Nick said.
"No, he's out with the gun. Come on in."
Nick went inside the cottage. There was a big fire in the fireplace. The wind made it roar. Bill shut the door.
"Have a drink,"
he said. He went out to the kitchen and came back with 2 glasses and a pitcher of water. Nick reached the whiskey bottle from the shelf above the fireplace. "All right," he said.
"Good,"
said Bill. They sat in front of the fire and drank the Irish whiskey and water. "It's got a swell, smoky taste," Nick said, and looked at the fire through the glass.
"That's the peat,"
Bill said. "You can't get peat into liquor," Nick said.
"That doesn't make any difference,"
Bill said. "You ever seen any peat?" Nick asked.
"No,"
said Bill. "Neither have I," Nick said. His shoes, stretched out on the hearth, began to steam in front of the fire.
"Better take your shoes off,"
Bill said. "I haven't got any socks on."
"Take them off and dry them and I'll get you some,"
Bill said. He went upstairs into the loft and Nick heard him walking about overhead. Upstairs was open under the roof and was where Bill and his father and he, Nick, sometimes slept. In back was a dressing room. They moved the cots back out of the rain and covered them with rubber blankets. Bill came down with a pair of heavy wool socks.
It's getting too late to go around without socks.
He said. I hate to see them start again, Nick said. He pulled the socks on and slumped back in the chair, putting his feet up on the screen in front of the fire.
You'll dent in the screen,
Bill said. Nick swung his feet over to the side of the fireplace. Got anything to read? He asked.
only the paper.
What did the cards do?
Dropped a doubleheader to the Giants.
That ought to cinch it for him,
It's a gift.
Bill said.
As long as McGraw can buy every good ball player in the league, there's nothing to it.
He can't buy them all, Nick said.
He buys all the ones he wants,
Bill said.
or he makes them discontented so they have to trade them to him.
Like Heine Zim, Nick agreed.
That bonehead will do him a lot of good.
Bill stood up. He can hit, Nick offered. The heat from the fire was baking his legs.
He's a sweet fielder too,
Bill said.
but he loses ball games.
Maybe that's what McGraw wants him for, Nick suggested.
Maybe.
Bill agreed. There's always more to it than we know about, Nick said.
Of course, but we've got pretty good dope for being so far away.
Like how much better you can pick them if you don't see the horses.
That's it.
Bill reached down the whiskey bottle. His big hand went all the way around it. He poured the whiskey into the glass Nick held out.
How much water?
Just the same. He sat down on the floor beside Nick's chair. It's good when the fall storms come, isn't it? Nick said.
It's swell.
It's the best time of year, Nick said.
Wouldn't it be hell to be in town?
Bill said. I'd like to see the World Series, Nick said.
Well, they're always in New York or Philadelphia now.
Bill said.
That doesn't do us any good.
I wonder if the Cards will ever win a pennant,
Not in our lifetime.
Bill said. Gee, they'd go crazy, Nick said.
Do you remember when they got going that once before they had the train wreck?
Boy, Nick said, remembering. Bill reached over to the table under the window for the book that lay there, face down, where he had put it when he went to the door. He held his glass in one hand and the book in the other, leaning back against Nick's chair. What are you reading?
Richard Feverell.
I couldn't get into it,
It's all right.
Bill said.
It ain't a bad book, Wimage.
What else have you got I haven't read? Nick asked.
Did you read The Forest Lovers?
Yep, that's the one where they go to bed every night with the naked sword between them.
That's a good book, Wimage.
It's a swell book. What I couldn't ever understand was what good the sword would do. It would have to stay edge up all the time, because if it went over flat, you could roll right over it, and it wouldn't make any trouble,
It's a symbol.
Bill said. Sure, said Nick, but it isn't practical.
Did you ever read Fortitude?
It's fine, Nick said. That's a real book. That's where his old man is after him all the time. Have you got any more by Walpole?
The Dark Forest.
Bill said.
It's about Russia.
What does he know about Russia? Nick asked.
I don't know. You can't ever tell about those guys. Maybe he was there when he was a boy. He's got a lot of dope on it.
I'd like to meet him, Nick said.
I'd like to meet Chesterton.
Bill said. I wish he was here now, Nick said. We'd take him fishing on the Voy tomorrow,
I wonder if he'd like to go fishing.
Bill said. Sure, said Nick. He must be about the best guy there is. Do you remember the Flying Inn?
If an angel out in heaven gives you something else to drink, thank him for his kind intentions and go pour them down the sink.
That's right, said Nick. I guess he's a better guy than Walpole,
Oh, he's a better guy, all right.
Bill said.
But Walpole's a better writer.
I don't know, Nick said. Chesterton's a classic,
Walpole's a classic, too.
Bill insisted. I wish we had them both here, Nick said. We'd take them both fishing to the Voy tomorrow,
Let's get drunk.
Bill said. All right, Nick agreed.
My old man won't care.
Bill said. Are you sure? Said Nick.
I know it.
Bill said. I'm a little drunk now, Nick said.
You aren't drunk.
Bill said. He got up from the floor and reached for the whiskey bottle. Nick held out his glass. His eyes fixed on it while Bill poured. Bill poured the glass half full of whiskey.
Put in your own water.
He said.
There's just one more shot.
Got any more? Nick asked.
There's plenty, but Dad only likes me to drink what's open.
Sure, said Nick.
He says opening bottles is what makes drunkards.
Bill explained. That's right, said Nick. He was impressed. He had never thought of that before. He had always thought it was solitary drinking that made drunkards. How is your dad? He asked respectfully.
He's all right.
Bill said.
He gets a little wild sometimes.
He's a swell guy, Nick said. He poured water into his glass out of the pitcher. It mixed slowly with the whiskey. There was more whiskey than water.
You bet your life he is.
Bill said. My old man's all right, Nick said.
You're damn right he is,
said Bill. He claims he's never taken a drink in his life, Nick said, as though announcing a scientific fact.
Well, he's a doctor. My old man's a painter. That's different.
He's missed a lot, Nick said sadly.
You can't tell.
Bill said.
Everything's got its compensations.
He says he's missed a lot himself, Nick confessed.
Well, Dad's had a tough time,
Bill said. It all evens up, Nick said. They sat looking into the fire and thinking of this profound truth. I'll get a chunk from the back porch, Nick said. He had noticed while looking into the fire that the fire was dying down. Also, he wished to show he could hold his liquor and be practical. Even if his father had never touched a drop, Bill was not going to get him drunk before he himself was drunk.
Bring one of the big beach chunks,
Bill said. He was also being consciously practical. Nick came in with the log through the kitchen, and in passing knocked a pan off the kitchen table. He laid the log down and picked up the pan. It had contained dried apricots, soaking in water. He carefully picked up all the apricots off the floor. Some of them had gone under the stove, and put them back in a pan. He dipped some more water onto them from the pail by the table. He felt quite proud of himself. He had been thoroughly practical. He came in carrying the log, and Bill got up from the chair and helped him put it on the fire. That's a swell log, Nick said.
I've been saving it for the bad weather,
Bill said.
A log like that will bum all night.
There will be coals left to start the fire in the morning, Nick said.
That's right.
Bill agreed. They were conducting the conversation on a high plane. Let's have another drink, Nick said.
I think there's another bottle open in the locker,
Bill said. He kneeled down in the corner in front of the locker and brought out a square-faced bottle.
It's scotch,
he said. I'll get some more water, Nick said. He went out into the kitchen again. He filled the pitcher with the dipper dipping cold spring water from the pail. On his way back to the living room, he passed a mirror in the dining room and looked in it. His face looked strange. He smiled at the face in the mirror and it grinned back at him. He winked at it and went on. It was not his face, but it didn't make any difference. Bill had poured out the drinks. That's an awfully big shot, Nick said.
Not for us, Winage.
Bill said. What'll we drink to? Nick asked, holding up the glass.
Let's drink to fishing,
Bill said. All right, Nick said. Gentlemen, I give you fishing.
All fishing.
Bill said.
Everywhere.
Fishing, Nick said. That's what we drink to.
It's better than baseball,
Bill said. There isn't any comparison, said Nick. How did we ever get talking about baseball?
It was a mistake.
Bill said.
Baseball is a game for louts.
They drank all that was in their glasses.
Now let's drink to Chesterton.
And Walpole, Nick interposed. Nick poured out the liquor. Bill poured in the water. They looked at each other. They felt very fine.
Gentlemen,
Bill said.
I give you Chesterton and Walpole.
Exactly, gentlemen, Nick said. They drank. Bill filled up the glasses. They sat down in the big chairs in front of the fire.
You are very wise, Wemidge,
Bill said. What do you mean? Asked Nick.
To bust off that Marge business.
Bill said. I guess so, said Nick.
It was the only thing to do. If you hadn't by now, you'd be back home working, trying to get enough money to get married.
Nick said nothing.
Once a man's married, he's absolutely bitched.
Bill went on.
He hasn't got anything more. Nothing. Not a damn thing. He's done for. You've seen the guys that get married.
Nick said nothing.
You can tell them.
Bill said.
They get this sort of fat married look. They're done for.
Sure, said Nick.
It was probably bad busting it off.
Bill said.
But you always fall for someone else, and then it's all right. Fall for them, but don't let them ruin you.
Yes, said Nick.
If you'd have married her, you would have had to marry the whole family. Remember her mother and that guy she married?
Nick nodded.
Imagine having them around in the house all the time and going to Sunday dinners at their house, and having them over to dinner and her telling Marge all the time what to do and how to act.
Nick sat quiet.
You came out of it damned well.
Bill said.
Now she can marry somebody out of her own sort and settle down and maybe be happy. You can't mix oil and water, and you can't mix that sort of thing any more than if I'd marry Ida that works for Stratton's. She'd probably like it too.
Nick said nothing. The liquor had all died out of him and left him alone. Bill wasn't there. He wasn't sitting in front of the fire or going fishing tomorrow with Bill and his dad or anything. He wasn't drunk. It was all gone. All he knew was that he had once had Marjorie and that he had lost her. She was gone and he had sent her away. That was all that mattered. He might never see her again. Probably he never would. It was all gone. Finished. "Let's have another drink," Nick said. Bill poured it out. Nick splashed in a little water.
If you'd gone on that way, we wouldn't be here now.
Bill said. That was true. His original plan had been to go down home and get a job. Then he had planned to stay in Charlevoix all winter so he could be near Marge. Now he did not know what he was going to do.
Probably we wouldn't even be going fishing tomorrow.
Bill said.
You had the right dope, all right.
I couldn't help it, Nick said.
I know. That's the way it works out.
Bill said. All of a sudden, everything was over, Nick said. I don't know why it was. I couldn't help it. Just like when the 3-day blows come now and rip all the leaves off the trees.
Well, it's over. That's the point.
Bill said. It was my fault, Nick said.
It doesn't make any difference whose fault it was.
Bill said. No, I suppose not, Nick said. The big thing was that Marjorie was gone, and that probably he would never see her again. He had talked to her about how they would go to Italy together and the fun they would have. Places they would be together. It was all gone now.
So long as it's over, that's all that matters.
Bill said.
I'll tell you, Image. I was worried while it was going on. You played it right. I understand her mother is sore as hell. She told a lot of people you were engaged.
We weren't engaged, Nick said.
It was all around that you were.
I can't help it, Nick said. We weren't.
Weren't you going to get married?
Bill asked. Yes, but we weren't engaged, Nick said.
What's the difference?
Bill asked judicially. I don't know. There's a difference,
I don't see it.
said Bill. All right, said Nick. Let's get drunk,
All right,
Bill said.
let's get really drunk.
Let's get drunk and then go swimming, Nick said. He drank off his glass. I'm sorry as hell about her, but what could I do? He said. You know what her mother was like,
She was terrible.
Bill said. All of a sudden it was over, Nick said. I oughtn't talk about it,
You aren't.
Bill said.
I talked about it and now I'm through. We won't ever speak of it again. You don't want to think about it, you might get back into it again.
Nick had not thought about that. It had seemed so absolute. That was a thought. That made him feel better. Sure, he said. There's always that danger. He felt happy now. There was not anything that was irrevocable. He might go into town Saturday night. Today was Thursday. There's always a chance, he said.
You'll have to watch yourself.
Bill said. I'll watch myself, he said. He felt happy. Nothing was finished. Nothing was ever lost. He would go into town on Saturday. He felt lighter, as he had felt before Bill started to talk about it. There was always a way out. Let's take the guns and go down to the point and look for your dad, Nick said.
All right.
Bill took down the 2 shotguns from the rack on the wall. He opened a box of shells. Nick put on his Mackinac coat and his shoes. His shoes were stiff from the drying. He was still quite drunk, but his head was clear. How do you feel? Nick asked.
Swell. I've just got a good edge on.
Bill was buttoning up his sweater. There's no use getting drunk.
No, we ought to get outdoors.
They stepped out the door. The wind was blowing a gale. The birds will lie right down in the grass with this, Nick said. They struck down toward the orchard.
I saw a woodcock this morning.
Bill said. Maybe we'll jump him, Nick said.
You can't shoot in this wind.
Bill said. Outside now, the Marge business was no longer so tragic. It was not even very important. The wind blew everything like that away. It's coming right off the big lake, Nick said. Against the wind, they heard the thud of a shotgun.
That's Dad.
Bill said.
He's down in the swamp.
Let's cut down that way, Nick said.
Let's cut across the lower meadow and see if we jump anything.
Bill said. All right, Nick said. None of it was important now. The wind blew it out of his head. Still, he could always go into town Saturday night. It was a good thing to have in reserve.
We hope you enjoyed that first story. Now we've got a very short story by Ernest Hemingway. Yes, that is the title.
One hot evening in Padua, they carried him up onto the roof, and he could look out over the top of the town. There were chimney swifts in the sky. After a while, it got dark, and the searchlights came out. The others went down and took the bottles with them. He and Luz could hear them below on the balcony. Luz sat on the bed. She was cool and fresh in the hot night. Luz stayed on night duty for 3 months. They were glad to let her. When they operated on him, she prepared him for the operating table, and they had a joke about friend or enema. He went under the anesthetic, holding tight onto himself so he would not blab about anything during the silly, talky time. After he got on crutches, he used to take the temperatures so Luz would not have to get up from the bed. There were only a few patients, and they all knew about it. They all liked Luz. As he walked back along the halls, he thought of Luz in his bed. Before he went back to the front, they went into the Duomo and prayed. It was dim and quiet, and there were other people praying. They wanted to get married, but there was not enough time for the banns, and neither of them had birth certificates. They felt as though they were married, but they wanted everyone to know about it, and to make it so they could not lose it. Luz wrote him many letters that he never got until after the armistice. 15 came in a bunch to the front, and he sorted them by the dates and read them all straight through. They were all about the hospital, and how much she loved him, and how it was impossible to get along without him, and how terrible it was missing him at night. After the armistice, they agreed he should go home to get a job so they might be married. Luz would not come home until he had a good job and could come to New York to meet her. It was understood he would not drink, and he did not want to see his friends or anyone in the States, only to get a job and be married. On the train from Padua to Milan, they quarreled about her not being willing to come home at once. When they had to say goodbye in the station at Milan, they kissed goodbye, but were not finished with the quarrel. He felt sick about saying goodbye like that. He went to America on a boat from Genoa. Luz went back to Pordenone to open a hospital. It was lonely and rainy there, and there was a battalion of Arditi quartered in the town. Living in the muddy, rainy town in the winter, the major of the battalion made love to Luz, and she had never known Italians before, and finally wrote to the States that theirs had been only a boy and girl affair. She was sorry, and she knew he would probably not be able to understand, but might someday forgive her and be grateful to her, and she expected, absolutely unexpectedly, to be married in the spring. She loved him as always, but she realized now it was only a boy and girl love. She hoped he would have a great career, and believed in him absolutely. She knew it was for the best. The major did not marry her in the spring, or any other time. Luz never got an answer to the letter to Chicago about it. A short time after, he contracted gonorrhea from a salesgirl in a loop department store while riding in a taxicab through Lincoln Park.
Finally, we have Hills Like White Elephants by Ernest Hemingway.
The hills across the valley of the Ebro were long and white. On this side, there was no shade and no trees, and the station was between two lines of rails in the sun. Close against the side of the station, there was the warm shadow of the building and a curtain, made of strings of bamboo beads, hung across the open door into the bar to keep out flies. The American and the girl with him sat at a table in the shade, outside the building. It was very hot, and the express from Barcelona would come in 40 minutes. It stopped at this junction for 2 minutes, and then went on to Madrid.
What should we drink?
The girl asked. She had taken off her hat and put it on the table.
It's pretty hot.
The man said.
Let's drink beer.
Dos cervezas.
The man said into the curtain.
Big ones?
A woman asked from the doorway.
Yes, 2 big ones.
The woman brought 2 glasses of beer and 2 felt pads. She put the felt pads and the beer glasses on the table and looked at the man and the girl. The girl was looking off at the line of hills. They were white in the sun, and the country was brown and dry.
They look like white elephants.
She said.
I've never seen one.
The man drank his beer.
No, you wouldn't have.
I might have.
The man said.
Just because you say I wouldn't have doesn't prove anything.
The girl looked at the bead curtain.
They've painted something on it.
She said.
What does it say?
Anis del Toro. It's a drink.
Could we try it?
The man called.
Listen.
Through the curtain. The woman came out from the bar.
4 reales.
We want 2 Anis del Toro.
With water?
Do you want it with water?
I don't know.
The girl said.
Is it good with water?
It's alright.
You want them with water?
Asked the woman.
Yes, with water.
It tastes like licorice.
The girl said, and put the glass down.
That's the way with everything.
Yes.
Said the girl.
Everything tastes of licorice, especially all the things you've waited so long for, like absinthe.
Oh, cut it out.
You started it.
The girl said.
I was being amused. I was having a fine time.
Well, let's try and have a fine time.
All right, I was trying. I said the mountains looked like white elephants. Wasn't that bright?
That was bright.
I wanted to try this new drink. That's all we do, isn't it? Look at things and try new drinks?
I guess so.
The girl looked across at the hills.
They're lovely hills.
She said.
They don't really look like white elephants. I just meant the coloring of their skin through the trees.
Should we have another drink?
All right.
The warm wind blew the bead curtain against the table.
The beer's nice and cool.
The man said.
It's lovely.
The girl said.
It's really an awfully simple operation, Jig.
The man said.
It's not really an operation at all.
The girl looked at the ground the table legs rested on.
I know you wouldn't mind, Jig. It's really not anything. It's just to let the air in.
The girl did not say anything.
I'll go with you and I'll stay with you all the time. They just let the air in and then it's all perfectly natural.
Then what will we do afterward?
We'll be fine afterward, just like we were before.
What makes you think so?
That's the only thing that bothers us. It's the only thing that's made us unhappy.
The girl looked at the bead curtain, put her hand out, and took hold of 2 of the strings of beads.
And you think then we'll be all right and be happy?
I know we will. You don't have to be afraid. I've known lots of people that have done it.
So have I.
Said the girl.
And afterward they were all so happy.
Well, if you don't want to do it, you don't have to. I wouldn't have you do it if you didn't want to. But I know it's perfectly simple.
And you really want to?
I think it's the best thing to do. But I don't want you to do it if you don't really want to.
And if I do it, you'll be happy and things will be like they were and you'll love me?
I love you now. You know I love you.
I know. But if I do it, then it will be nice again? If I say things are like white elephants and you'll like it?
I'll love it. I love it now, but I just can't think about it. You know how I get when I worry.
If I do it, you won't ever worry?
I won't worry about that because it's perfectly simple.
Then I'll do it, because I don't care about me.
What do you mean?
I don't care about me.
Well, I care about you.
Oh, yes, but I don't care about me. And I'll do it, and then everything will be fine.
I don't want you to do it if you feel that way.
The girl stood up and walked to the end of the station. Across, on the other side, were fields of grain and trees along the banks of the Ebro. Far away, beyond the river, were mountains. The shadow of a cloud moved across the field of grain, and she saw the river through the trees.
And we could have all this.
She said.
And we could have everything, and every day we make it more impossible.
What did you say?
I said we could have everything.
We can have everything.
No, we can't.
We can have the whole world.
No, we can't.
We can go everywhere.
No, we can't. It isn't ours anymore.
It's ours.
No, it isn't. And once they take it away, you never get it back.
But they haven't taken it away.
We'll wait and see.
Come on back in the shade.
He said.
You mustn't feel that way.
I don't feel any way.
The girl said.
I just know things.
I don't want you to do anything that you don't want to do.
Nor that isn't good for me.
She said.
I know. Could we have another beer?
All right, but you've got to realize.
I realize.
The girl said.
Can't we maybe stop talking?
They sat down at the table, and the girl looked across at the hills on the dry side of the valley, and the man looked at her and at the table.
You've got to realize.
He said.
That I don't want you to do it if you don't want to. I'm perfectly willing to go through with it if it means anything to you.
Doesn't it mean anything to you? We could get along.
Of course it does, but I don't want anybody but you. I don't want anyone else. And I know it's perfectly simple.
Yes, you know it's perfectly simple.
It's all right for you to say that, but I do know it.
Would you do something for me now?
I'd do anything for you.
Would you please, 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 please stop talking?
He did not say anything, but looked at the bags against the wall of the station. There were labels on them from all the hotels where they had spent nights.
But I don't want you to.
He said.
I don't care anything about it.
I'll scream.
The girl said. The woman came out through the curtains with 2 glasses of beer and put them down on the damp felt pads.
The train comes in 5 minutes.
She said.
What did she say?
Asked the girl.
That the train is coming in 5 minutes.
The girl smiled brightly at the woman to thank her.
I better take the bags over to the other side of the station.
The man said. She smiled at him.
All right, then come back and we'll finish the beer.
He picked up the 2 heavy bags and carried them around the station to the other tracks. He looked up the tracks, but could not see the train. Coming back, he walked through the bar room, where people waiting for the train were drinking. He drank an anise at the bar, and looked at the people. They were all waiting reasonably for the train. He went out through the bead curtain. She was sitting at the table and smiled at him.
Do you feel better?
He asked.
I feel fine.
She said.
There's nothing wrong with me. I feel fine.
Now that you've listened, here's what to read later. Hemingway's style of writing is so simple and unique. Chances are you had to read something written by Hemingway for English class in middle school or high school. While the stories we read to you today were certainly brief, one of the most famous Hemingway anecdotes is of his 6-word story. When challenged to create the shortest story possible, he came up with the iconic single line, "For sale, baby shoes, never worn." The 3 of us studied this in high school and actually came up with 6-word stories of our own. What we learned from this project is the beauty of Hemingway is not what words are actually on the page, but what lies between them. So if you can appreciate subtlety and subtext, if you love to sleuth out the author's meaning, if you enjoy discovering the intent in what is left unsaid, And if you can consume lyrical prose and narrative poetry in equal measure, then you have to read Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. Will gets into the elevator of his apartment building with one objective: revenge. His brother Sean has just been murdered and the rules are clear. It's up to Will to get even. So, with his brother's gun in his pocket, he begins his descent. One floor down, though, the elevator doors open and in steps Will's past. Each floor builds on the next until the question becomes, who will Will be when the doors open for the final time? A gorgeous novel in verse with an audiobook read by the author himself, Long Way Down is a story you will not soon forget. It tackles gun violence, family, and duty from a perspective you have probably never read before. Its poetic form lends itself perfectly to a subtle and satisfying reveal. Much like Hemingway, the book requires the reader to read beyond the words on the page. However, Long Way Down takes a step beyond Hemingway by challenging the reader not just to discover the meaning, but also to decide what to do with it. We decided to share it with all of you. So if you enjoyed Hemingway's subtle and striking stories, then we highly recommend Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. Thanks for listening to this episode of Listen Now, Read Later. Follow us on Instagram for fun extras and updates on our next episode. Now it's time for you to go read the book, and we'll catch you when you listen later.